In the 1750s, London was a city of vice. At night, its 700,000 souls thronged the streets and alleys. For the capital's pleasure seekers, money could buy whatever they desired. Drink, gambling, and sex were all on offer, and every taste was catered for.
Covent Garden is where one of the most sordid stories of the century unfolded. Its peculiar cast of characters included a pimp, an infamous lady of pleasure, and a desperate Irish hag. What bound the three of them together was a small book that held the particulars of every strumpet worth having in the surrounding streets. It's a story of lust, love, and the lost souls who survived through the dirtiest trade of this city.
Throughout the 18th century, the sex trade was one of London's most important industries. Alleyways and backrooms echoed with the groans of illicit pleasure. An army of more than 50,000 women indulged the libidinal whims of their eager clients. Everybody from street sweepers to the Prince of Wales revelled in the sexual carnival.
It's clear that a large proportion of 18th century men did visit prostitutes. You have to realize that most people married very late. Men would have met prostitutes in a whole range of different environments. In the first place, they would meet them on the streets, and certainly poorer prostitutes would be cruising up and down most of the major thoroughfares of London, actually tugging on people's sleeves, perhaps actually slipping their hand into their breeches in order to attract their attention or to start the process of negotiation.
At the time, Covent Garden was a seething mass of humanity. It was a place where two different worlds merged, London's main fruit and vegetable market and the fast-beating heart of the city's sex trade.
Every day at 4 or 5 in the morning, whole groups of people from around London would be setting off trying to get to Covent Garden for the beginning of the trading day. Beggars and street urchins, ballad singers and market stall keepers, as well as large numbers of vagrants and beggars who would sleep in the market square itself.
When the daylight faded and the street sellers had gone home, the market would be taken over by women selling themselves, not fruit and veg, and they would also be fairly noisy, fairly strident, brightly dressed, and fairly aggressive. Dr. Johnson was once accosted by one, and Boswell has him saying, "No, my dear, it won't do."
The streets were infested with raucous coffee houses and boisterous taverns. In almost every Covent Garden thoroughfare, there would also be brothels where men sought pleasure in the company of London's working girls.
The Rose Tavern, as depicted by Hogarth, was actually a very good example of what a debauched scene would have been like in reality in 18th century Covent Garden. There were rooms that could be rented out en masse and whores brought in, and orgies take place, along with wine, dining, and all sorts of sexual services were on offer. And so a gentleman could take his pick.
When hunting for female flesh, London's more discerning gentlemen would seek out one man, Jack Harris, the self-proclaimed pimp general of all England.
He was the son of a local tavern keeper and a shady figure whose real name was John Harrison. Rather than plying his trade from the back streets as one might imagine, Harris worked from the Shakespeare's Head Tavern as a waiter-pimp. Combining waiting tables and pimping was not uncommon, and Harris was by far the most accomplished practitioner in the city. The drunk and lascivious used to sate their appetites in the upstairs rooms, or go off into the night with a lady of their choosing after Harris had made the necessary introductions. It was this man who is the inspiration for the infamous catalogue of prostitutes, the Harris's List.
Miss Love, number 14 George Street. Eliza is of a dark complexion, being a downright mulatto, and intimates by the thickness of her hair and her eyebrows that she's well furred below. She charges little more than it is well worth, considering the scarcity of its complexion in this country.
At the height of his influence, the pimp general was said to be earning as much as the First Lord of the Treasury, and Harris was operating right under the noses of the authorities.
Both the Night Watch and the Bow Street runners generally turned a blind eye to prostitution. They had to get on with the people on the street. It was not a question of arresting prostitutes because prostitution itself wasn't illegal. What they were interested in is maintaining an orderly city environment.
Harris built his carnal empire by ensuring he could offer his clients a steady supply of conscripts, ever on the prowl for new recruits to satisfy his customers' voracious appetites. He assembled a stable of around 400 women from all over London. Offering choice and diversity, Harris was able to profit from his clients' more exotic sexual demands.
Miss Robinson at the jelly shops. This lady is Jew, but has no objection to a bit of Christian flesh, but not in Shylock's way. She chooses her lover, and less than £1 will satisfy her.
Harris recorded the various erotic skills of his prostitutes, so when clients made their special requests, he would know immediately who to bring. Harris's notes came to the attention of another habitué of the local underworld, a dissolute Irish hack called Samuel Derrick.
Sam Derrick's face would have been a familiar one in Covent Garden. He worked in nearby Fleet Street, where he eked out a meagre existence and then drank and gambled most of it away. Not surprisingly, he was a very popular man and could count amongst his friends David Garrick and Dr. Johnson, in addition to a number of very friendly prostitutes. He spent the majority of his time either at the Bedford Coffee House or over at the Shakespeare's Head Tavern, where he watched with keen interest the movements of Jack Harris. Derrick was always crippled by debts, but by 1757 the bailiffs finally caught up with him. If he were to avoid prison, he needed a miracle.
Derrick had earned little from his journalistic endeavours, but he now saw a way to make real money by publishing his own guide to the prostitutes of London. Derrick realised that he needed to maintain some semblance of respectability, so he struck a deal with Jack Harris for the right to use his name in the title. This would give the book real credibility amongst London's libertines, and it would be much more than just a list of names and addresses. It offered intimate details of the prostitutes' lives and described their appearance and the services they offered. It would become the definitive record of the sexual peccadilloes of Georgian London.
Miss Loveborn, number 32 George Street. If we are not misinformed, this lady is one of the daughters of fortune, having a pretty good income left her by an old flagellant who she literally flogged out of the world.
Harris's list was wonderful for its display of the varieties of sexual predilection on offer, ranging from oral sex to flagellation. One of the most interesting was a lady who, such was the elasticity of her loins that she could toss a man into the air and catch him again and put him back in the same place.
Like the prostitutes, Derrick also made lucrative use of his special talents. Overnight, the list transformed his fortunes. The advance he received for the edition of 1757 wiped out his debts, and it's estimated that within the year he'd sold around 8,000 copies. The lists were potent publicity for London's whores, but also for the more refined members of the sex industry, the courtesans.
Charlotte Hayes was one of the finest ladies of the night on offer. She was born to Mrs. Elizabeth Ward, a brothel keeper, and raised at the very bosom of London's sex trade. Mrs. Ward groomed and educated her daughter, and eventually sold her virginity to the highest bidder.